Good morning, all. I deem it my privilege to introduce unto you the speaker for the session, Dr. Ramani. Dr. Ramani is a curriculum developer, materials designer, teacher trainer, ELT administrator, and quality assurance expert in the education sector. A teacher of over 4 decades with teaching and administrative assignments in India and the Middle East, he has initiated and implemented curricular reforms in English studies and in the Middle East. Dr. Ramani has been associated with ELTAI for over 4 decades, promoting the cause of the association in various capacities as master trainer, members of its executive committee and webinar organizing committee, and editor-in-chief of its print and online journals. Sir, kindly take over the session, sir.
Good morning, everybody. Back to this FDP on the fourth day. Many of you may remember me as the first speaker, the speaker of the first session after the inaugural session. I've come back to bother you again. I've been attending all the sessions, and in the chat box, I was also interested in looking at the various questions posed by many of you. And I found that some of you had repeatedly asked questions relating to strategies for developing the reading skills in rural learners. How can you do it in rural learners? How can you do it in rural schools and colleges? And so on. And I also found that these questions were not directly addressed by the speakers of the other sessions because their focuses were different. So I thought I could spend about 45 to 50 minutes on addressing that issue, because I'm sure many of you will have this at the back of your mind, what will be the specific topic of the session you are attending. So from that point of view, I'm trying to bring in an element of relevance and relatedness of the FDP to your own teaching learning context. I suppose I'm right in assuming that many of you are interested in finding out how best you can help your own learners in rural areas. I thought of addressing this issue in a session such as this. These 2 or 3 key issues came up. They were uppermost in my mind. Whenever we talk about difficulties that rural learners have in understanding English, in coping with reading classes, writing lessons, writing tasks, understanding the text prescribed for them either by universities, if you follow the university curriculum, if you're affiliated to some university or the other across the country, or even if you are teaching in autonomous colleges, the so-called autonomous colleges. From my experience, most of the autonomous colleges have not reformed their English curriculum in keeping with the times. So you still find the traditional anthologies being prescribed, collection of essays and a few poems. Whether the autonomous college is located in a city, big town, or a rural area, the situation seems to be more or less similar. So we talk about difficulties that learners face. Difficulties are small problems that they encounter based on several factors. If they belong to the first generation of learners, then that poses one difficulty. Because rural learners don't speak English at home, most of the parents do not speak English, they do not know English, they don't converse in English. So there is no way of the rural learners practicing whatever English they learn in the colleges and schools at home or even with their friends. The common mode of communication is their own language, the local language, vernacular. And the difficulty of being in a large class where teachers cannot pay special attention to every learner. Lack of infrastructure, but these days I think most state governments have a lot of funds in upgrading the infrastructure of their institutions by going in for smart boards or at least whiteboards and LCD projectors, some provision for playing audio clips and videos, or even projecting text on the screen using some supplementary materials dealing with grammatical aspects or vocabulary or even comprehension. But these difficulties can be overcome. You can find ways of enabling learners to overcome these difficulties and, in spite of those difficulties, make them learn the language. In this case, English. But what very often happens is that the difficulties are turned into challenges by the way we teach. I'll explain what I mean through some examples as I go along. Challenges are more serious, more critical. They require a lot more of conscious effort and time and energy. But difficulties can be overcome. So at this point, I would like to draw a distinction between difficulties which are not so serious. It might appear to be serious, but which are not really serious. And they don't pose serious obstacles or hurdles even to our rural learners trying to pick up some English on their own. But let us not turn these difficulties into challenges so that they become more difficult for us to handle. The second key issue that comes to my mind is whenever we say our rural learners, they can't understand English, I think that there is a misunderstanding. It's a misconception. Understanding the English that the teacher speaks, understanding the instructions that the teacher gives in setting up tasks, understanding the English that the teacher uses in introducing the lesson, introducing the text, understanding the English of the questions that the teacher asks in the course of the lesson, is one thing. I don't think our students, even rural learners, have serious difficulties in understanding, in comprehending the English spoken around them, especially the English spoken by the teacher in the class. Assuming that the teacher uses rather simple language. not highly literary language, but simple language, words and structures that the teacher knows that the learners will be able to follow. The misunderstanding is this. What teachers actually mean by saying that the learners cannot understand English is that they cannot speak in English. They cannot write in English on their own. They are not able to produce in English. They are not able to produce utterances in English. They are not able to produce grammatically acceptable sentences in English. They are not able to use the words they have learned in proper sentence structure to communicate them. So I would like to draw a distinction between comprehension, which means understanding the language spoken, and the ability to produce utterances of one's own in that language. You only have to take example of people traveling to other states on holiday. They may not know the language of that state, the people speaking in that state. But within a few hours, they're able to pick up a few key words and phrases, and they're able to understand. And they, in conjunction with non-verbal language, non-verbal means of communication, they're able to understand what the shopkeeper try to say to them, what they want to communicate to the shopkeeper, what people in the marketplace say, what the fellow travelers say in Hindi or Telugu or Malayalam when they're traveling by train or bus. But they won't be able to respond to them in their own language because they have not acquired that new language. So the ability to produce the language is far less than the ability to understand. I spent nearly 15 years in the Middle East, for 6 years in one country, another 8.5 years in another country. Right from day one, I had to use only English to teach. I taught Arab learners. I didn't learn Arabic. I didn't know Arabic when I landed there. And most of the students didn't know much of English to be able to follow me. But they made efforts. But in the course of time, I was able to understand my colleagues talking in Arabic among themselves in the staff room. I was able to understand I was able to get the general sense of the conversation that went on around me in the market, in shops, in supermarkets, in hypermarkets, and so on. But I couldn't utter any sentence in Arabic on my own. So please understand that your students can and do follow much of what you say in English. But we ask them to respond to your questions in English because they are unable to use English on their own. They are shy, they are dumbstruck, they don't open their mouths, and you think they don't follow English. So they follow English, but they can't speak in English. I'll illustrate that with some examples as I go on. The third key issue related to teaching reading texts in rural areas is the difficulty of the text prescribed. On the one hand, we complain that the students cannot understand difficult texts in English, classical texts in English, 20th century essays, and so on. And yet we prescribe such texts even in autonomous colleges, saying we have to maintain some kind of standard. Standards for whom? You want to tell the world that you have prescribed essays by G.K. Chesterton, Robert Lynn, A.G. Gardner, A.M. Forster, and claim that your English curriculum is of a good standard, of a high standard. But what happens inside the classroom? Your learners cannot cope with such texts on their own. They depend on you to summarize the content of the text, paraphrase the content, even to give the content in the mother tongue. So, by prescribing texts which are difficult in the name of maintaining certain standard or quality, but at the same time complaining that your students can't cope with such texts, I don't understand why we do these things. So there is a notion of the difficulty level of the text, which is measured in terms of the grammatical structures used, whether simple structures are used or complex structures are used, whether sentences are short or long, whether the vocabulary used is within the range of the learners at that level, or whether there are many difficult words that put them off. And you have to match this text difficulty against the learner's reading ability levels. They may be in grade 8, they may be in the first year of the undergraduate program, but the reading ability may still be at the level of grade 4 or grade 5 in school. If there is a mismatch, and there is often a mismatch between the learner's reading ability and the kinds of text that we prescribe as part of the English curriculum, this is something that has not been reconciled. And there are ways of reconciling these two. Ways of bringing the text difficulty level to the learner's ability to read, reading ability level. Okay. I don't want to go further because my examples will illustrate some of these problems. Just a quick recap of what we must have learned over the last 3 days, because these basic things we need to keep at the back of our mind, whether we teach reading to urban learners or rural learners, to learners in English medium schools or vernacular medium schools, and so on. Reading is purposeful. Every reading text and every learner, every reader has a purpose in reading a particular kind of text. And the purposes vary from text to text, from reader to reader, from context to context. We don't read all the text in the same way, using the same strategies. You must have learned this in the last 3 days. Reading is also selective. You don't read every word in a text. You only sample parts of a text, and from the minimum sample, you try to arrive at the overall meaning. Because the human mind, human brain is very economical. It tries to take in minimum input from the text and maximize the understanding. It doesn't want to waste time reading the text from the first line to the last line, letter by letter or word by word. The third important point you must have learned is that the reading speed varies according to the content of the text and the purpose of the reader. You don't read all the text slowly, you don't read all the text very fast. There are certain texts that you read fast, especially read text for extensive reading, text that you read for pleasure and enjoyment, not for minute details. And texts that are prescribed as part of your subject studies, you need to read those texts slowly over and over again for complete understanding of the concepts and so on. So the speed varies. We also anticipate what we are about to read. I think I illustrated that in my session. I read the text, sentences of a text one by one. And after reading the first sentence, I asked you, what kind of a mental picture you have. After reading the second text, how did that mental picture get altered, modified, the third sentence, and so on. We always keep predicting what is likely to come. The human mind is capable of that. And finally, reading is an active process. It's an active process, it's also an interactive process. It's not merely a linear decoding of the words on the page, trying to decipher what language the words belong to, what letters are put together to form what words. So reading goes much beyond that. This is only part of a micro reading skill, decoding the text. I suppose you keep these 5 basic things in mind about reading. Reading has a purpose. It is selective. We don't process all parts of a text to get at the meaning. We read different texts at different rates, different paces, depending on purpose and content. We often anticipate what we are about to read, and reading is an interactive process, which is also illustrated quite beautifully by Dr. Elango in the previous session. When we read something, what does it trigger in your mind? What does it kindle in your mind? What does it fire in your mind? Okay. Your imagination is triggered. So we are not passive decoders of the text on the page. We are active makers of meaning when we read something. Okay. These are all preliminaries, so I'm trying to go through them a little faster. And what are the implications of these 5 aspects of reading that I discussed a little while ago? The meaning of a text does not depend on the meanings of particular words. Even if you don't know many words in the text, you can still make sense of the gist of the passage, the overall idea, the main idea, the key points. Reading silently for meaning and reading aloud are distinct activities. Very often we think that in every reading class we should make students read aloud. There are problems in that. I don't have time to go into the details. For one thing, even you and I, as experienced readers, if you are given a new book, a new magazine article, and asked to read it silently, to read it aloud, some article aloud, you will bungle, you'll stumble on a few words, you will not be able to read it as fluently as you would like to be. So unless the reader is familiar with the content in a general sense, in an overall sense, he or she will not be able to read it aloud meaningfully. He will break the text at the wrong places, not as meaningful chunks. You can find it out in the way the person reads. Comprehension does not entail identifying or examining all the information contained in a text, but involves sampling it. The point I mentioned in the previous slide, reading is selective. You don't have to process all the words in a text to understand it. Reading involves the reader's interaction with the text. The final point on the previous slide, readers bring meaning to the text. They bring their own background knowledge and experience to understand what the text offers. And finally, grammar does not reveal meaning. By analyzing a text into grammatical structures, you don't get the meaning. Getting the message must precede grammatical analysis. Very often overlooked and ignored, but we need to remind ourselves of this very clearly. Now let me move on to the core of my presentation. You have a text on the screen. I suppose you can read that. short text. I tried to make it as big in font size as I could. Take a minute or two to read the text silently. After you read it silently, I'll read it once aloud. Done? Chang and Yang were the original Siamese twins born in Siam in 1811. The king of Siam ordered them to be killed, but their mother managed to keep them alive and bring them up as normal as possible. They were not very tall and were connected by a band of tissue 4.5 inches long, but they were very intelligent. They emigrated to America, became famous as a circus act, and by the time they were 30, had made a lot of money. Then they got married. They married sisters and between them had 22 children. For some years, they all lived in the twins' original house, but when the families grew, they built separate houses. Chang and Eng spending 3 days in one and the next 3 in the other. In their later years, Chang's health deteriorated because he drank too much. Yang became so worried that he tried to get separated, but no doctor would do the operation. The end of their lives was tragic. There's one more paragraph, I'll read it aloud. On January 12, 1874, Chang took to his bed with bronchitis in his own house. On the Thursday, it was time to move, according to the arrangement, to Yang's house. Yang did not want Chang to go, but Chang insisted. His health grew steadily worse until on January 17th he died. When Yang realized his twin brother had died, he said, "Then I am going to die too." He did, 2 hours later. Okay. Couple of questions, very quick questions. I suppose this text can be read by even rural learners. If you think even this is difficult, you can break down the text into shorter sentences. For example, in the second paragraph, you have the second sentence, which is long. You can break it down into 2 or 3 short sentences. And then the last sentence in the second paragraph also can be broken down. Second sentence in the first paragraph, the king of Siam ordered them to be killed. Full stop. However, their mother managed to keep them alive and bring them up as normal as possible. So it is in the teacher's hand to simplify a text which he or she thinks will be somewhat difficult for the students. Okay. How long did they live? My question. You can type the answer in the chat box. How long did Chang and Yang live? Any answers? Please type in your answers in the chat box. I'm looking at the chat box. I read the last paragraph also, short text. Okay, if that is difficult. Chang and Yang were born and grew up in America. Is this sentence true or false? Chang and Yang. Okay. Chang and Yang were born and grew up in America. True or false? Okay, 63 years. Okay. I'll come to that. False. Because they were not born in America. They were born in Siam, but they emigrated to America sometime later. Okay. How did they arrive at the number 63? Because they were born in 1811 and they died in 1874. The passage does not tell you how many years they lived, but you have to infer. You have to infer that meaning. Very simple inferential question. Date of birth, date of death, year of birth and year of death. You subtract one from the other, and then you get the number of years they lived together. Okay. They spent all their lives in the same house. Is it true or false? They spend all their lives in the same house. Again, false. Inference based on calculation. Somebody is asking, is it inference or calculation? Is the inference based on calculation? You cannot infer the lifespan unless you do some simple arithmetic. It's not a very complicated algebraic maths or calculus, differential calculus or integral calculus. It's a very simple arithmetic that all literate people can do. Even farmers can do this simple calculation. Okay, they grow crops, they sell their produce in the market, they grow vegetables, they sell them in the market. They know how much they sell them for. They know the cost of the fertilizers and things like that. So it doesn't call for a very complex calculation. It's an inferential question, but based on simple calculation. Okay. Now, one more sentence. The twins were not very tall, but intelligent. Is it true or false? They were not tall, but they were intelligent. True or false? Quickly, please. Is it false? True, true. Yes. Second paragraph. They were not very tall and were connected, but they were very intelligent. Okay. So the idea I'm trying to drive home is that with this simple text, you can ask true and false questions. You can ask multiple choice questions like choose the best summary of the second paragraph. What does the second paragraph talk about? The origins of the term Siamese twins, the childhood of Chang and Yang, the families of Chang and Yang, the lives of Chang and Yang, which are the four best summarizes the second paragraph. You can ask open-ended questions. Why did Yang want to be separated from Chang and so on? And then questions like, what do you think? Why did the king want the twins to be killed? Why did the king want the twins to be killed? Why would no doctor separate them? Answers are not given in the passage. They have to surmise based on their own background knowledge and experience, prior knowledge. Because they are connected only by a band of tissue 4.5 inches long. You're talking about 1811. So no doctor dared carry out the operation, the surgery, because surgery had not developed so much in those days, and the doctor perhaps was worried that in trying to perform the surgery and separate the twins, he would kill both of them or one of them. So these are questions for which they have to think of answers from their own background knowledge. And you can also ask vocabulary questions like find words or phrases in the text which tell us that Chang's health became worse. Which word in the passage suggests that his health became worse, deteriorated? Okay, yeah. Their lives had a sad ending, tragic. So this is just to illustrate the kind of simple text you can begin with. Forget about the prescribed text. Or in addition to the prescribed text, I'll tell you how to handle the prescribed text a little later on. But if you're planning some kind of a remedial program for these rural learners to be able to cope with the prescribed text or give extra help, support, you identify such very simple passages which they can cope with on their own. You should give them a sense of satisfaction that they can read something in English and understand, make sense of it. And another tip that I can give you is that how do you know that their ability to understand is better than the ability to speak in that language in answer to a question? You ask the question in English, but you allow them to respond to the question or answer the question in their own mother tongue, the vernacular. And you'll be surprised to know that they give the answer correctly. If they have not understand the text in English, how would they give a correct answer to your question? I've tried this several times on several occasions. I was simply amazed to find that students with the lowest proficiency in English. I worked in a college, Lila College, where students were streamed according to their proficiency levels based on a placement test. I used to take only the weakest students, people whose language was extremely poor. They couldn't compose a sentence of their own in English. But when I allowed them to answer my questions in Tamil, they gave correct answers. And when I praised them for the correct answers, they were happy. That means so they have understood English. They could not give the answer in English, but they could understand the text in English. Okay, so you can have vocabulary questions, not the usual type of give synonyms of antonyms of give the meanings of the following, use the following in sentences of your own. These have no relevance. Contextualize vocabulary and grammar questions in the context of the passage itself. If we say their ending was, sad ending, they'll be able to relate it to the word tragic, tragedy, comedy. They've seen films, they've seen serials, they watch movies, okay. So they know what is the difference between sad ending and happy ending, tragic ending, comedy. They watch so many comic clips. It is all in their mind. Don't underestimate their intelligence and their prior knowledge. They do have enough knowledge of the world to be able to respond to questions. Okay. This is also another very short text. Read it, and you can check their comprehension. The kinds of comprehension questions I'm suggesting are not to test their comprehension, but to help them in understanding, to facilitate their comprehension. There's a difference in purpose. Comprehension test is different from questions that you ask as part of your teaching to help students understand the text better. So these are facilitative questions, questions that help students to understand the passage better. Now, I've underlined a few phrases and words. Left to myself, I would leave some of these to the learners themselves to guess from the context what they mean. I would not try to give them the meanings of all the underlined words and expressions. If you were to teach this short text to your students, which words do you think could be left to the students themselves to guess? Do you think they would understand the meaning of advise? Are they familiar with the word advise? Manage, annoy, pain? Are they familiar with the word pain? Do they know the meaning of severe pain? Stick your tongue out, stick, crowd of people, hanging out, pretend, and two phrasal verbs, make up, made up his mind, put an end. Again, this is left to the decision of the individual teacher depending on the specific context of the learners. But what I'm suggesting is, in any context, there would be at least 2 or 3 words from this passage which could be left for the learners themselves to guess. Make a rough guess of the meaning, not the dictionary meaning. We're not interested in the dictionary meaning, but to guess the meaning. Many people stopped him and asked his advice, but they never paid for this service. So advice, giving advice, the service, okay. I've got a severe pain on my left side. Shut your eyes and stick your tongue out, hanging out. Stick your tongue out, hanging out your tongue. Do they mean the same thing? So they can guess the meanings of some of these, but if they are not able to, then there is nothing wrong in giving the meaning even in their own language. So you don't take the position saying no Tamil, no use of the mother tongue at all in English classes, or use only mother tongue in all the English classes. No extremes. But if a little help here and there, giving the meaning in their own mother tongue, would help them overcome the very serious obstacle in understanding the meaning of a word, why not do it? The teacher has to use his or her discretion in such context. So you can ask simple questions like this. Which of these questions focus on the facts stated in the passage? Where in his body did the man feel pain? If the students don't understand that, you can say, did he feel the pain on the head? Did he feel the pain on the right side of his body, on the left side of his body, on his legs, on his feet, on his stomach? Prompt, give prompts, give cues. Because as I said earlier, your questions should help them understand better, but not by giving the answer away straight away. If you start giving 1 or 2 prompts, then they will be able to guess. Okay. Left side, very clearly said. What was the young man's problem? He had a severe pain. Where did he have severe pain? On the left side of his body. What about the right side of the body? Did he feel any pain there? No. So you can ask further questions, probing questions, to make sure that the students have understood the passage, etc. What I'm trying to say is, please give up the habit of beginning a reading lesson by writing on the board the so-called difficult words or hard words. I often hear teachers telling me, I write the hard words on the board and explain the meaning. Do you have soft words? Are the words hard or soft? Or difficult or easy to understand? Difficult for whom? For all the students in the class? How do you know? Did you ask them for the meaning first before you write them on the board? So the teacher assumes that certain words would be difficult for all the students, and it is his job to give the meaning straight away before they start opening the book. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. What's the meaning of making up one's mind? Yeah, you have to make up your mind, but you are not given the meaning. All of us make up our mind. We take decisions in our life. We always make up our mind. But what is making up our mind? Decide, take decision, the road not taken, to be or not to be. What kind of decision? What is the meaning of decision? Some students will ask. You don't know. Decision is a noun form of decide. What is decide? It is a verb form of decision. You're going round and round and round. You are turning a difficulty into a challenge. So please avoid listing out the so-called difficult words on the board, because not all the words are difficult for all of them. Some other students might know one or two words, other students might not know those words, but they might know the meaning of some other word. By making the students themselves discuss the meanings of these words, you can have the problem solved. And if there are still one or two phrases which none of the students in the class seems to have been familiar with, then you can give the meaning. It's not a taboo to give the meaning. But resist the temptation of giving out the meanings out of context at the outset. What did the doctor advise? It's also there in the passage. Was the doctor rich? It's not stated in the passage. You have to infer it. People used to stop him on the street and ask for advice. They did not pay him for his services, so obviously he could not be rich. Was the doctor unhappy or happy? Obviously unhappy. Why? Because people didn't pay him for his services. So first two questions are like inferential questions. Okay. Look at these possibilities also. After reading the passage, after checking their understanding, not testing their understanding, after checking their understanding and helping them improve their understanding, role play. Act out the conversation between the doctor and the young man. It's not acting out a play or one-act play. Maybe 2 or 3 sentences. The young man, good morning, doctor. Hello, doctor. The doctor says, yes, how are you? What's your problem? Then the young man says, I feel severe pain on my left side. Most of the words required are given in the text, so they can use them and act out to the conversation. Ask one pair of students to do it, then call another pair of students. You give them speaking practice so that their mouths get used to speaking out the words in the text. They are not thinking of new words. The words are already there. So such exercises would help them to shed off their inhibitions or shyness and become more and more confident. You can also have a discussion. How do you think the young man felt? Did he feel happy? Did he feel his pain had gone? Was he happy with the doctor? Not happy with the doctor? Why? Because the people were laughing at him. He was standing in the middle of the street with his eyes closed and then tongue hanging out. Do you think he was a good doctor? Why or why not? So you are extending the comprehension to a level where They are asked to evaluate, make their own assessment of what the actions of the doctor, the actions of the young man, the question, and so on, and so on. So whatever you learn in this FDP on different levels of comprehension, factual, inferential, imaginative comprehension, evaluative comprehension, extensional comprehension, extending knowledge of the text to their own personal lives, asking them questions whether they have had similar experience. Have they had an experience of a doctor giving them an advice like this, pulling their legs or making a joke out of them? Then the language stays in their mind forever. Not simply for the sake of exams, but extending it to their own personal life. You can also have these writing tasks. One day, the doctor was stopped by a young man in the street. The doctor was not interested, so he played a joke on him. He left the man standing in the street with his tongue hanging out. Okay. Even if the students suggest different words, as long as the words fit into the context grammatically and meaningfully, you accept those answers. They don't have to use the words from the text as such. Reproducing part of the text, not the whole text, the whole story. Doctor, village, annoyed, people, stop, street, advice, never paid, not much money. Only that part of the passage, not the rest of it. Not what happened between the doctor and the young man. So instead of asking very straightforward questions on, write the story of the doctor and the young man. Ask questions like this. By these activities, you are making the students go back to the text again and again to find out what words can fill in, how they can form sentences to reconstruct part of the story. And once they have written out the story, you can also ask them to read it aloud, 3 or 4 sentences, not very long, depending on the level of your students. I would like to end with one more suggestion is this and the next 3 slides form one text. This Beautiful World of Ours by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Another suggestion for dealing with reading text with rural learners is, if a text is long, prescribed text is long, divide it into manageable sections, 3 or 4 sections, 1 paragraph or 2 short paragraphs, okay, and then help them to comprehend those 2 short paragraphs by asking them comprehension, help questions, and so on. This is part of lesson planning. You don't have to finish the entire lesson in one day, one class period. So this is a suggestion that I would like to give. I have questions on this, no doubt. But then look at these useful strategies, a kind of summary of my presentation. I will give you final tip before I close the session. You'll all enjoy that. You'll find it very useful. As I said, begin with short text and gradually increase the length so that they become more and more confident of coping with them. If a text is grammatically complex, perhaps a simplified version of it to help understanding. I did that even years ago. There was an essay by Arnold Toynbee on Nehru. So very tough passage, tough text, but I wrote a simplified version of it and set comprehension help questions based on that, guided the students gradually step by step from overall understanding to understanding specific details of each part of the passage. And after completing the understanding of the simplified version, then I asked them to read the original text. So much of the meaning of the original text became clearer to them. This is another strategy that you can adopt. The last point I've already mentioned, don't write the so-called difficult words on the board. Then ask questions such as the ones I've suggested that facilitate and reinforce comprehension. Start from the overall understanding, main idea, global to local, and then from factual to inferential and so on. We have been hearing these words used by resource persons the last 3 days, and you will again hear some of these words in the next 3 or 4 days. Encourage students to guess meanings of words from the context. Deal with vocabulary and grammatical structures and patterns in the context of the text. That's important. Okay, now finally, just 2 minutes, I'll end my presentation, then take questions from you. I said simplify the text. Now you have the facility of having simplified texts. It's a passage called Is It Possible to Make No Waste? This is an article adapted by New Zealand. Look at the website address, please make a note. You can access this News-ELA, News-ELA. It basically takes news articles and then writes different simplified versions of the same text. And it makes these news articles available at 5 reading levels, 5 different reading difficulty levels. The texts vary in length and lexile level. Lexile level is an indicator of the difficulty of the text. Okay, that they give a score for that. I don't have time to go through that. You can Google search and find out what lexile is. Please make a note of this word, lexile. Do some research on your own and find out. I'm giving first 2 paragraphs from 3 of them as samples. I'm not going to deal with them. Just to give an example, you can access these from the website. You can also get similar passages, on different themes and so on. Text written in 5 different styles. Now, these are the first 2 paragraphs on the text on that theme. Word count, so they differ in length and lexile. This is written at a level of 620 lexile. Look at the first paragraph. Some places are trying to have less waste. Look at the sentence structure. Instead of throwing things away, people recycle more items. If a process produces no waste, it is called zero waste. The goal is to not send any trash to landfills or incinerators. New words. Landfills are garbage dumps. Trash gets sent there and buried with dirt. Incinerators are machines that burn trash. So look at the simple style in which this text is written. Look at the same content presented in 840 lexile level. Zero waste describes any process that makes no waste. The first sentence is a complex sentence. It uses, that clause. One way to do this is to recycle all the materials into new products. Look at the next passage. It's at 1040 lexile level. Zero waste refers to any process that makes no waste or that recycles waste into a new product. You see, multiple ideas are combined together into a single complex sentence, long sentence. The goal of a zero waste process is to send nothing to a landfill or incinerator. Second paragraph also you'll find this, but I want you to access the same passage from that site. I've given the title to that. The title is Is it possible to make no waste? And search for it and you'll get this. Okay, I think I should stop there. I've taken almost the entire hour given to me, but I'm willing to take questions from you.
Yes, sir.
If I had more time, I would have circulated these passages in advance, one day in advance, asked you to study them before coming to the session, and then you would have spent the time not reading the passages, but discussing your reactions to the types of questions on the text. Okay, thank you very much. You can end the slide share. End the slide share.
Okay, sir.
I am not using the remaining slides for want of time. Not necessary.
Yes, sir. So, and the questions to you. The first question is from Dr. Prohit. In the rural settings, mostly the emphasis is on grammar. How can the students overcome the fear of grammar while reading a text?
As I've said, grammar and vocabulary should be dealt with this context, and they should not precede understanding of the whatever meaning that they can get. When they read the first time, I don't say they'll understand the passage completely. And there is nothing like 100% comprehension. Because as I said, reading comprehension level also varies according to purpose, the contents, okay, the need of the learner. So there is nothing like 100% comprehension. Even if you explain a passage line by line, word by word, you are not ensuring 100% comprehension of a passage. Students can only take in what they can. The rest goes through one ear and out the other ear. They cannot assimilate. They cannot absorb. So please don't focus on grammar in a reading class. Grammar is only a means of conveying meaning. Structures or words are put together in the form of sentences, in different types of sentences, questions or statements, positive statements, affirmative statements, negative statements, only to convey ideas, different kinds of ideas. The grammar is not the focus. What do they get out of it? What do they understand by it? Don't talk about subject, verb, predicate, subject, verb, direct object, indirect object. You're not giving a lesson in grammar, you are giving a lesson in reading. And this brings me up to another related question. When you set comprehension questions, even in exams, examiners penalize students for not giving the answer in complete sentences. Are you testing their ability to write complete sentences or prove that they have understood the question and given the relevant answer? If the purpose of the question is reading comprehension check, even if they give one phrase, part of a sentence, a clause, broken sentence, if that piece of the text contains information that lets you know that they have understood the question and given the relevant answer, why don't you give them the full score? Because he has not written it complete sentence, and if you make some grammatical mistakes, it is half a mark out of 2, 1 mark out of 2. The focus is getting lost. Okay, next question, please.
Yes, sir. From the next question is from Ms. Nalini. Why students master the English language of their science and technology books with their high vocabulary, but struggle with their English textbooks?
First of all, I would like to question this assumption. Do they master the vocabulary in science and technology? They simply memorize these terms and the definitions. If you ask them to explain what the word means in their own language, that is the test of their mastery of the language. They reproduce these definitions and examples, descriptions of the process. How is hydrochloric acid manufactured in the laboratory? They will repeat it verbatim. This is the problem with fresh graduates teaching in engineering colleges, subjects like chemistry, physics, and so on. They reproduce what they've read in the text. If the student asks a question, ma'am, I don't understand this, they start, as I have been telling you, and then they repeat the same thing because they have not been trained to explain the same concept or idea in their own words. So, would you call that mastery of the language? It is learning certain terms. What is force? What is work? What is energy? What is conservation of momentum? These are terms, and they memorize the definitions. If you give them a practical example and ask them which law of physics applies here, they won't be able to tell you. So that is learning the terms without understanding what they mean really. So I question that. And secondly, they learn these terms because they have to. It is the subject of specialization. They are majoring in these subjects. In fact, the English teacher has to help them acquire even technical vocabulary by bringing in some of these kinds of texts into the English classroom, simplifying the text and help them to understand these words better, more effectively. They can retain them better and explain their meanings in their own words. I suppose I've answered that question.
Yes, sir. So thank you, sir. Thank you a lot, sir, for answering the questions which had been lingering in the minds of most English teachers. Thank you, sir. You touched upon different shades of reading and the things to be remembered while reading, especially among rural learners. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you all participants. I request you all to join the next session at 3 p.m. Kindly join 10 minutes earlier to the session. And I also would like to remind you that 80% of attendance is required to receive your certificate. So kindly maintain your attendance percentage. Thank you all. Thank you all participants. Meet you in the next session. Thank you.